Bex is then seen hanging up the phone, grabbing her head with both hands, kind of in the way you would if you were just like, fuck, I am dealing with a lot of shit right now. She puts her hands in her pockets and she walks out of frame of the camera. This video footage ends up being key in why there is so much speculation and conspiracy theories forming around what happened to Bex on the ship. Now, 9 a.m. rolls around and Tracy wakes up and notices that A, Bex isn't there, and B, the door is still bolted open. She says she immediately didn't have a good feeling about it. She claims she reported it to the security on board. Around this time, it was also noted that Bex did not show up for her shift for work. Security staff immediately began searching for her. They check all the cabins, all decks, and pretty much rip up the whole ship looking for her and cannot locate her. What they do claim to locate is a sandal, or sandals, a pair, rather, on the deck of the crew pool. I can't talk. The crew pool area on deck 5. They're these flowery pink girly sandals, and they see these and are immediately like, shit, she went overboard here, guys. That's apparently what the sandals told them, personally. Disney not only runs with this story, but they take the damn sandals and bring them back to Bex's room and place them on top of her stuff in the room and just leave them there. They call the authorities, obviously, to report it, which in this scenario is difficult as to who exactly is in charge. At the time of her disappearance, they were traveling through international waters. So, I guess to cover their ass, Disney calls the U.S. Coast Guard. They call whatever Mexico's version of that is, I guess. And they contacted the Bahamas, police department, being that the boat was registered there as its home, because apparently Disney is just straddling the fence financially and can't afford to pay their taxes on their cruise ships. But anyway, they also figure, hey, maybe we should let her family know. So 12 hours after they received the Facebook message from Bex, her parents, Michael and Anne, received a call that they were expecting to be Bex, but was in fact Disney, with the shittiest of news. They are flown out to Los Angeles, where the boat is now returning to dock. They said they were, quote, given the full Disney treatment, being that they were escorted by blacked out sedans that took them to the back entrance of the ship and led to fancy rooms and seated and briefed on what the current situation was. While this was going on, Disney had finished their brief investigation they did once Bex was discovered missing. They interviewed a couple of people real quick, but keep in mind, these aren't trained investigators. They are essentially rent-a-cops on board the ship just to make sure shit doesn't get too wild. They have no formal training and probably didn't really know what the fuck they were doing, and honestly, it wasn't their job to know either. Quite frankly, no one knew whose job it was supposed to be. It ended up falling into the jurisdiction of the Bahamas. This island was in no way prepared to handle this sort of investigation, and were ill-equipped to say the absolute fucking least. They sent one guy. They flew him 1,500 miles over to the ship docked in LA. He stayed 1 day and was done. He flew right back home. During his visit, he allegedly talked to maybe a handful of crew members, if that. 0 passengers. He collected no evidence and essentially scratched his ass for 36 hours until he was allowed to go home. He had no assistance from either the U.S. Coast Guard or the FBI or Mexican authorities, nothing. To this day, the Bahamas investigators cannot be reached, and numerous attempts to contact them fall on deaf ears. Disney, however, closed out their investigation, concluding that Bex accidentally fell overboard after the ship was struck by a rogue wave. That is literally in their official report. Now, we have several issues with this, and I'm going to walk you through all of them right now. So let's check back on Bex's parents. They arrive at the ship, they are taken into the conference room area and briefed on the situation. It is then that they are presented with that CCTV video footage I mentioned earlier of Bex on the phone, distressed and seemingly walking off, where they assume she entered the 5th deck crew pool area and fell overboard. Her parents, being jet-lagged, starved, and deprived of sleep within the past 48 hours, are doing everything they can to keep it together and process what is being told to them. They state in an interview years later that they wish they could go back in time and redo that day because they would have asked a million more questions and probed a million more times harder for answers they so desperately need to this day. After they are shown the video footage, they are taken to Bex's cabin. There, they find these weird-ass fucking sandals just chilling in there with her stuff, along with a note on her wall to, quote, call mom, which is so sad. It's also mentioned from a later investigation that there was plenty more evidence in the room, such as Bex's favorite pair of shorts just torn and thrown in the room, that were again never bagged as evidence from the Bahama butt scratcher investigator. After this, the parents subsequently start the search for answers for their missing daughter. Disney at some point releases images from the CCTV footage of Bex, stating that she placed the call from the 5th deck crew lounge before heading to the 5th deck crew pool area where she met her demise. However, and I'm not sure how this was later found out, the footage was not from the 5th deck at all, but in fact from the 1st deck. This is fucking wild because Disney's official report legit stands by the statement it's the 5th deck when it's been confirmed that it's not. On top of that, when Disney released the footage, they intentionally cropped out the location stamp on the footage, which is like fucking creepy, but really fucking stupid too. Did they think that nobody would recognize that area as not being the 5th deck, but the 1st? I'm so confused as to why they did this, and that confusion has led to a lot of people going down the path of this being a total Disney cover-up, which sounds like the shit nightmares are made of, in my opinion. So being that we've established that Disney lied about the location of the CCTV footage / the last known location of Bex before she went missing, we've got a new problem. You can easily ask yourself, okay, so maybe they meant to say she made the call from Deck 1, but subsequently headed to Deck 5, where she suddenly flew off the boat. Okay, sure. Only that's impossible. Now why, do you ask? Couple reasons. So when Bex hangs up, she has 2 directions she can walk. One would essentially take her to a pathway that eventually takes you to Deck 5. The other dead ends at the health center with no outside access, no outside deck area, and literally nothing else except the actual health center. It's completely sealed off. It's just the one room down a lightning bolt shaped hallway. Does she walk off in the direction of Deck 5? Hell no, she heads off to the health center. Now, she could have headed there, came back, and headed to Deck 5, right? Sure, only she never is picked up by that camera ever again, at least according to Disney. They also state she was not picked up by any other camera on the ship after this. Tell me again how a woman heads to a dead end and just somehow ends up on a different deck entirely and is not seen on any footage traveling from said point A to point B? 2 options here. Either she never left Deck 1 Health Center area, or Disney had more footage and didn't release it for whatever reason. Either one looks pretty bad for Disney. This particular piece of evidence just literally fucked with me, so I had to Google it, of course. So I Googled the blueprints of the ship to verify this information because it just doesn't make sense. Sure enough, Deck 1 is the deck that has the least amount of shit on it, but if you compare the images of the CCTV and the layout of the ship, there's literally nowhere else she could go. There's a line of 4 elevators, in between which there's a phone. A small lounge that leads nowhere directly to the left of the elevators, and from there it leads down a hallway to some crew cabins. To the right of the elevators is another lobby that literally leads nowhere. It's a dead-end little lobby. And then there's, just to the left of the elevators, and in between the lobby, a lightning bolt-shaped hallway that leads up to the health center. It again dead ends at the health center. It's really eerie to actually look at. It was giving me the creeps, but I had to see if this made sense. Also, a little side note that I found equally strange and creepy. As I was looking this up, I noticed that Disney has deliberately cut off the majority of the bow section on their blueprints for every deck. weird because that's where this takes place. The health center is towards the bow of it, as well as the crew deck 5 pool area that's also in the bow. So to go on their website and to want to look at the ship, you can't see the majority of the bow. It's just weird. There's no explanation for it either. So moving on to the next piece of questionable evidence, the sandals. So Disney, for some reason, spotted the sandals on deck 5, and these sandals spoke to them. They told them that they belonged to Bex, and Disney felt compelled to return them to her cabin, despite the potential tampering with evidence they were committing by doing so. Well, guess what? These fucking sandals weren't even hers. All her close friends took one look at these when the images were released to the public because, of course, the butt scratcher didn't interview anybody and do shit, so they had no idea these were ever found and assumed to be hers. But yeah, they took one look at these sandals and were like, these aren't hers. Not only were they a size and a half too small, they weren't her style at all, and to top it off, they had another fucking crew member's name written on the side of them. Like, are you fucking kidding me, Disney? You're worse than the butt scratcher McGee over here. Jesus. So that alone blows the giant-ass hole into the hole she fell off the side of the boat on deck 5 and drowned theory. Although the theory had issues all on its own. For one, deck 5 crew pool area is surrounded by a minimum of a 6-foot high wall all the way around. Disney claimed that a rogue wave had hit the ship and that's what caused her to fall off. Which, if that happened, is completely possible. However, deck 5 is 90 feet above sea level, meaning the rogue wave would have needed to be essentially 100 feet or more to reach over the deck and wash her off. I'd imagine something around a 50-foot wave hitting hard enough could jostle the boat enough to have her fly off. All of this is 100% completely possible. Nobody argues that. The glaringly obvious problem with this theory, though, is that not only was the weather reportedly peacefully calm and mild, but a rogue wave was not reported by anyone on the ship that day. Thousands of people on this ship and not a single one can back up the claim of feeling or seeing a rogue wave hit. Is the fucking captain steering the ship with his fucking eyes closed? Was literally every single soul on the ship except Bex asleep at the time the wave hit? I mean, what the fuck is that? A wave big enough to knock her off the boat would be notoriously felt throughout the entire ship, and nobody felt the wave that day. The fact that this is the story Disney stuck with and is also still on the official report really bugs the crap out of me. It also makes me never want to go on a cruise ship, period, though. Rogue waves are absolutely sent from the devil himself. So, that essentially leaves us with the last theory. She jumped. Now, as much as I want to say this one makes the most sense, it just doesn't quite feel right. I'm not 100% convinced this is what happened to her. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely some key points in this case that ring true to that. If Tracy was in fact telling the truth about Bex's delicate mental state in the days and weeks leading up to this, it would feed this theory. Although it makes me question her character if she saw the clear as fucking day signs and did nothing to help this friend and lover that she was so deeply in love with. Because of that, it makes me question the validity of her statements regarding Bex's mental health. I believe Bex was troubled by their relationship, absolutely, but enough to drive her to suicide? I'm not completely convinced. There just isn't enough information to support that for me. Her family doesn't believe so either, albeit their stance is from a more emotional standpoint. I don't believe it's ever easy for a family to come to terms with the fact that a loved one has taken their exit from this world. And while they claim she wasn't depressed and had been making plans to do things with them, therefore how could she possibly been planning her suicide? We all know that this isn't enough to say it didn't or couldn't be true. We don't know what's going on in anyone's mind but our own. Mental health is so easily shrouded for many people, and it's something that they live with every day until some decide they don't want to anymore. It's tragic and heartbreaking, and it blindsides many, which makes it all the harder to wrap your head around. But, for me at least, it's not the vibe I'm getting here. I obviously didn't know her personally, so my opinion isn't worth a dick in the grand scheme of things, but I can't say she jumped. I definitely know she didn't fall because of the rogue wave. I wonder if she was thrown, although there isn't enough evidence to support that either, at least none that's been made to the public. It's clear that Disney either has more footage that incriminates them, otherwise